Out of nowhere, I had one of those aha moments, like when a cartoon character gets a light bulb over their head. It dawned on me that my third child wasn't really mine. She belonged to another man. I was on a call with a representative from Genealogy Gurus, calm, trying to figure out why my daughter's DNA test hadn't been processed after 10 weeks. I had given it to her as an extra Christmas present and provided the representative with the necessary information to locate it. After about 5 minutes of waiting, he came back on the line and assured me the test had been processed. However, he mentioned it was a confidentiality issue between the company and the test taker, so he couldn't disclose any more details. I asked, "If you've processed it, why doesn't it show up in my DNA results?" My excitement was palpable when I asked. The representative replied, a bit annoyed, "Sir, there are many reasons your daughter may not appear in your DNA matches, but I can't discuss this specific test with you." That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. The number one reason she wouldn't appear in my matches is because she's not biologically related to me. I ended the call in a daze. I remember hitting the red end call button and then just breaking down in tears. A few minutes later, I found myself curled up on the couch in the family room. With 15 minutes left before my lunch break ended, I decided to call my daughter, who was probably on her lunch break too, since we both worked in the same time zone. Knowing she usually read a book at her desk during lunch, I wasn't worried about disturbing her. She answered on the first ring, her voice sounding a bit tired. "Hi, Daddy, how are you?" I responded, "Sweetheart, you know I love and trust you completely, but I found out about the DNA test. I called the genealogy company, and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago." There was a moment of silence, and I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end. "I know, Dad. We need to talk, but I can't do it here and now. Call me tonight, and please make sure Mom isn't in the room when you do." Driving back to the office felt like a blur. I have to admit I didn't have a productive afternoon at the engineering firm where I worked. My mind was in turmoil, flooded with countless thoughts and questions, especially the troubling notion that my cherished daughter might not actually be my own. Being naturally analytical, I knew I needed to approach this mess methodically. After all, there's a reason I climbed to the position of VP of engineering. Treating personal issues like project challenges seemed the most logical way forward. This mindset was something old man Dwayne had drilled into me when he hired me straight out of university. Back then, his company was just taking off, and with Dwayne at the helm and me as his right-hand man, we turned it into an industry powerhouse, reaping significant financial success along the way. I had a great job, complete with excellent benefits and smart, witty colleagues. Plus, every evening, I came home to a beautiful, alluring wife and our 3 wonderful kids. As time passed, the kids grew up, moved out, got married, and started families of their own. At first, the house felt a bit empty, but we found ways to fill the void, and I thought the solitude even helped strengthen our bond as a couple. But looking back over the past month, I started piecing together some strange occurrences, like Emily's phone call to my wife about 2 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday night, and we were both in the family room watching TV when Samantha's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, said it was Emily, and then took the call. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes, with Samantha mostly responding with yes and no. I noticed tears forming in her eyes. When she hung up, I asked if everything was all right. She told me Emily's cat had some health issues, brushing it off as no big deal, though I could sense a bit of unease in her. It struck me as odd how personally she seemed to take Emily's cat problems. Little did I know, that might have been the moment Emily discovered the truth. Samantha had no idea about the DNA test I had secretly sent to Emily. I hadn't thought it significant enough to mention. Emily was the only one of our 3 kids interested in genealogy, so I thought she'd love the idea of taking the DNA test. I had been researching my family's ancestry for years and was particularly fascinated by the DNA testing aspect. I assumed Emily would be just as enthusiastic. Clearly, I was wrong. When I got home, I tried my best not to act differently around Samantha, even though I was seething inside. I kept reminding myself, one problem at a time. I met Samantha during my sophomore year of university, but we didn't really connect until my senior year. Since then, it felt like we were inseparable, at least from my perspective. We got married a year after graduation, which was 31 years ago. I'd always thought it was the best decision I ever made. Even at 54, she still carried her beauty gracefully, maintaining a workout routine that kept her looking like she was in her 30s, despite having 3 kids. She was a bundle of fun and humor, and until today, I had eagerly looked forward to spending the rest of my life with her. Around 8 p.m., I told Samantha I needed to make a call to the old man about a project we were working on, and I excused myself from the room. In reality, I grabbed my jacket and headed out to the porch swing, where I could talk without Samantha overhearing. I dialed Emily's number. She picked up on the first ring, her voice filled with unmistakable distress. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you earlier, but Mom asked me to keep quiet until she could talk to you," she whispered before I could even say hello. "Hey, I'm not mad at you. Take a deep breath," I replied, trying to calm her. "I'm not blaming you. You're just as much a victim in this mess as I am." I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end, knowing how much this was tearing her apart. "I want you to know, this doesn't change a thing between us. I'm still your dad, and you'll always be my pumpkin. I've loved you and your siblings with all my heart, and that's never going to change unless you want it to." She broke down at that point, her sobs making her words almost impossible to understand. "I love you, Daddy. I don't need anyone else but you," she cried. Carefully, I told her that I needed her help with some DNA information. I reassured her that we wouldn't get into anything else, so she wouldn't feel trapped in the middle. I needed to know if she had any DNA matches. She sighed and confirmed that Amanda Thompson turned out to be her half-sister. I was stunned and asked if she meant Amanda, the daughter of Uncle Jack and Aunt Laura. She softly said yes. I told her it wasn't her fault and that she never needed to apologize to me. This shocking revelation meant that Jack Thompson, known to my kids as Uncle Jack and to everyone else as appeals court judge Jack Thompson, was Emily's biological father. This also meant my wife had an affair with her boss when he was an attorney at the law firm. It must have happened at least 25 years ago, since Emily is 24 years old now. Back then, Samantha worked as his administrator. Jack left the law firm to become a state judge a few years later, eventually moving to the state capital where his career flourished. Samantha didn't pursue a romantic relationship with Jack after that. She stayed at Gui Hao and eventually became the office manager. Despite this, during the years they worked together, Jack and his wife Laura became very close friends with us. Our children called them uncle and auntie, and their kids did the same with us. Sometimes, when I was away on business trips, Samantha and the kids would stay at Jack and Laura's lake house. It had never seemed strange to me that the kids often mentioned Aunt Laura taking them out without Samantha or me. Looking back, I realized I must have missed some important clues. I was lost in my thoughts when Emily called out to me. I apologized, telling her I had drifted off, and thanked her for her help, asking her to give my regards to Ethan, her husband. Emily then asked what my next steps were. I confessed that I didn't know yet. She urged me not to do anything reckless. A little foolishness was fine, but she warned me against doing something that could get me arrested. It was then that the idea of harming Samantha briefly crossed my mind, but I promised Emily I wouldn't do anything to get myself in trouble. I never break promises to my kids. My immediate concern was to reassure Emily about our relationship. Then I needed to figure out who Samantha had been cheating with. My third task was to start divorce proceedings, but I needed a new lawyer since mine was connected to the firm where Samantha worked, which was out of the question. After securing legal counsel and getting my affairs in order, I would have to confront Samantha, soon to be my ex-wife. The house felt colder and emptier when Samantha and I were together. She would talk incessantly, likely out of nervousness. I think she was trying hard to keep me happy, maybe hoping it would cushion the blow when I eventually discovered the truth. It was clear there was a growing distance between us, and she wasn't making any effort to close it. A week later, I met with an attorney. As soon as he found out my wife was the office manager at Gui Hao, he looked uneasy, so I moved on to the next lawyer on my list. She was a young woman in her 20s who just smiled when I mentioned Samantha's position at Gui Hao. This was the kind of attorney I needed, someone who wouldn't be intimidated if one of Gui Hao's high-profile attorneys represented my wife. I laid out what I knew about the infidelity, starting with the shocking news that my youngest child wasn't biologically mine, but was actually Jack Thompson's child. Yes, that Jack Thompson, the Court of Appeals judge. My attorney, Sophie Martin, listened carefully, and I watched her closely to gauge whether I should continue with her or find someone else. Sophie remarked that it sounded like quite a story, and we shifted our focus to the financial aspects. Considering our solid jobs, pensions, and benefits, Sophie proposed that we split our joint assets equally, keep our pensions, and sell the house. This arrangement would leave both of us financially secure, though I'd be in a slightly better position due to my higher income and better pension. Sophie added that unless I was determined to seek revenge over my spouse's infidelity, or perhaps just a lack of respect, we could resolve this amicably. I told her that despite feeling wronged, I wasn't interested in punishing Samantha financially. Sophie then asked if I wanted to pursue legal action against the judge involved, noting that it would be much more complex and time-consuming. I may have responded a bit harshly, saying that dealing with the judge was my concern and I'd handle it myself. Sophie understood and explained that if Samantha didn't contest the divorce, we could settle it in about 6 months. If she did contest it, it might take over a year. I told her I hadn't set any deadlines yet and to take her time and do it right. With the legal aspect in progress, it was time to move on to the next step, the confrontation. I decided to wait another week, hoping Samantha's conscience would get the better of her. That Saturday night was our usual date night. Dinner, a movie, and an intimate moment. Saturday nights had always been special for us, and it had been 2 weeks since our last date, and just as long since we'd been intimate. After discovering Emily's affair, I couldn't bring myself to follow through with our plans. Samantha didn't question it, which was another sign she knew I was aware. She was good at hiding her true feelings, but that was about to change. I decided to take Samantha to an upscale French restaurant, where we enjoyed a bottle of wine and savored some exquisite desserts. She seemed happier than she had been in weeks. Once we got home, I helped her out of her coat, guided her to the kitchen table, and pulled out a chair for her. Then I said the dreaded words, "We need to talk." Samantha gave me a half-hearted smile as I poured myself a Jack Daniels on the rocks and offered her a drink from the liquor cabinet, which she politely declined. After placing my drink on the table, I locked eyes with her and said, "The floor is yours." Samantha reminded me that it had been a long time since she and Jack had been together, about 20 years. She asked if we could consider it a mistake from the past and move on. While I was relieved she didn't dispute the accuracy of the DNA test, her attempt to downplay it as ancient history felt dismissive. I pressed her for more details, asking about the timeline and frequency of her affair with Jack, and whether our first 2 children, Lucas and Rachel, were also his. Samantha clarified that Lucas and Rachel were indeed mine. She explained that her involvement with Jack began about a year after Rachel was born and lasted around 3 years. She said the affair ended when Jack left the firm to pursue a judicial career, ensuring his background check was clean. After their breakup, they only met a few times at the lake house, with Laura initially being unaware of the situation but later learning the truth. Samantha mentioned a reconciliation meeting where she and Jack assured Laura that there would be no more intimacy. Frustrated, I asked Samantha why she had never tried to have an open discussion with me and if I was just a backup plan. She responded, wiping her hands on her sleeves, saying she knew she could never tell me because I would have immediately filed for divorce. She claimed she loved me then, and still does. I couldn't help but point out her apparent love for Jack, noting how she seemed to start and stop with him based on his wishes, almost treating me like a fallback option. Samantha desperately protested, insisting that she loved me with all her heart. In response, I accused her of having loved Jack with all her heart. I pointed out how Samantha had sacrificed her relationship with me for Jack's career ambitions, all while knowing that I was merely a fallback option. I made it clear that although she might have had some affection for me, she was fully aware of how much I idolized her and depended on our family to handle Jack's absence. Samantha's gaze dropped to her knees, which seemed to confirm this painful truth. Regarding Emily, Samantha admitted that during her affair with Jack, she hadn't really considered the long-term consequences until the DNA test revealed the truth. She assumed that since both she and Jack had brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would question Emily's paternity. She thought I wouldn't doubt it, especially since Emily resembled her, though Samantha hadn't known for sure until the test results came in. I was incredulous and asked if she was suggesting that I was to blame. Samantha explained that she and Jack had discussed the possibility of Emily being his child, but she had reassured him not to worry because Emily looked like me. Samantha mentioned that Jack might not have known for sure, but probably did by now, and she hadn't heard from him since Emily and Ethan's wedding 2 years ago. Samantha insisted that regardless of who knew what, Emily was still her child, stating firmly that she was listed on the birth certificate, loved her, and considered her her own. She warned that Jack had better not even think about claiming otherwise, and that if he reached out to me, I should make it clear. I told Samantha that I intended to have the other 2 children undergo DNA testing as soon as possible, explaining that I needed to know for my own peace of mind. Samantha pleaded with me, questioning why I couldn't trust her, and insisted that I already knew the other 2 were mine. My newfound distrust was evident, and it clearly shocked Samantha. She was also deeply troubled by the idea of me revealing her infidelity to our other children, understandably not wanting to be seen as unfaithful in their eyes. I shifted the conversation to probe deeper into the details of Samantha's affair, asking about how frequently it occurred and the various places they met. Samantha started explaining that their relationship hadn't been premeditated, but evolved from their time spent together at work, where they became friends and then something more. She described Jack as kind, considerate, witty, funny, and passionate, mentioning that they shared a profound connection. Because both of them were married, they made sure to keep their meetings discreet, usually outside of town, and never at either of our homes, as that would have been wrong on many levels. Samantha whispered that they hadn't been intimate since their affair ended. When I asked if Laura knew about everything and had forgiven them, she confirmed, reiterating that she had mentioned it before. With a touch of uncertainty in my voice, I confessed that I wasn't sure I could go back to how things were. Samantha tried to soothe me, acknowledging the wrongness of their actions, but stressing that it had been over for 20 years, and I hadn't had to endure it while it was happening. She pleaded for us to return to our previous life, where I was her loving husband, and she was my devoted wife, insisting that nothing needed to change. I firmly told Samantha that things had already shifted. I revealed that I had spent nearly 3 weeks reflecting on what I might have done wrong for her to fall for another man, and I questioned whether I could ever trust her fully again, let alone stay married. I expressed with deep emotion that I had given her my heart completely, only for her to treat it as something to be taken out when it suited her. I emphasized that our marriage was meant to be a commitment of unwavering love, not one of convenience. At this point, Samantha began to cry. Normally, I would have tried to comfort her, but this time felt different. I retreated to the family room, turned on the TV, and left her alone at the kitchen table. That night, we shared the same bed, but for the first time in a while, we didn't cuddle. I moved as far from her as I could on the double bed and didn't let her snuggle up to me when she climbed in. On Sunday morning, as Samantha made a nice breakfast for us, I decided it was time to bring up the topic of divorce. Her reaction was intense. She nearly shouted at me, arguing that the affair happened over 20 years ago and that I had been unaware of it. She insisted that it was in the past and we should simply move forward. I countered loudly, making it clear that a mistake remains a mistake no matter how much time has passed. I expressed my profound sense of betrayal, emphasizing how she had deceived, lied, and cheated on me, thus violating my trust. I pointed out that these were not just temporary issues. Unable to continue the conversation, I left the table with half my plate uneaten and went outside to mow the lawn. That was the last conversation I had with Samantha until Wednesday afternoon, when she told me that Laura Thompson would be joining us the following weekend. I wasn't thrilled about this development, but Laura, an old and dear friend who had experienced a similar betrayal, seemed worth talking to. On Friday night at 6 o'clock, Laura arrived after a 2-hour drive from her house. To my surprise, she came alone, without Jack. During dinner, our conversation was light and friendly, but afterward, as we moved to the family room with glasses of wine, it shifted. Laura began discussing the affair with a calm and detached demeanor, as if it were a historical event. However, as she spoke, her emotions became more intense, and tears began to fill both her and Samantha's eyes. Laura recounted that when Jack had revealed the affair to her, she had believed it was a thing of the past, and that he had assured her it wouldn't happen again. She admitted to being devastated initially, but upon reflection, she realized that since it had ended before she even knew about it, she wasn't hurt as badly as she might have been otherwise. Knowing Laura wasn't a gold digger, I could see how things had unfolded. Jack's personality is indeed captivating. Although I only recently learned about Emily, just like everyone else, I genuinely felt sorry for Laura. She never mentioned the few times Samantha and Jack had met after their initial affair, especially at the Thompsons' lake house. I wondered if Laura knew about those encounters but didn't ask. It did make me ponder whether Jack was an exceptional lawyer, as Laura seemed almost apologetic about his affair, rather than upset with him. Unlike Laura, I wasn't as composed or charmed by her eloquence. I wasn't inclined to overlook Samantha and Jack's actions, despite their relationship spanning 2 decades. I often think about what my life would be like if I left Samantha and how it would affect me and our children. Laura continued, saying that one should always consider whether life would improve or worsen without their spouse. In her case, she believed it would be worse. I thanked Laura for sharing her perspective, acknowledging it was something I needed to think about carefully. Several factors were at play, including the fact that, unlike Laura, I wasn't informed about the affair. I stumbled upon it purely by accident. Samantha knew it was wrong to be involved with Jack and anticipated my reaction. She believed it would be better if I remained ignorant, which would have been the case if not for the DNA test. Now, 20 years later, I discovered that the love of my life had been intimate with another man before returning to me. Throughout Laura's story, Samantha remained silent, merely listening. Samantha couldn't have known that I noticed her glances towards me, so I sat casually, letting Laura's narrative mildly annoy Samantha. My response to Laura's story wasn't what Samantha had hoped for, and neither was Laura's. They exchanged glances laden with sorrow, realizing my response wasn't what they had anticipated. I shook my head in disbelief, walked into the kitchen to pour another glass of wine, and returned to the family room, switching on the TV with a decisive click. It was my way of signaling that the conversation was over. The women picked up on my cue and moved to the living room, where their voices faded into the background. After I finished my program, I turned off the TV, popped my head into the living room to bid them goodnight, and headed upstairs to our bedroom. Later on Saturday, Laura approached me in the family room, insisting we needed to have a serious talk. Not knowing where Samantha had disappeared to, I agreed, and we settled into the formal living room. Laura started by acknowledging my pain, but argued that not forgiving Samantha and choosing to end our marriage would be a grave mistake. She insisted that our love for each other was what truly mattered, and that the past was just that, past. Laura highlighted the tragedy of letting something that happened 2 decades ago ruin the rest of our lives. She suggested that if she could find it in her heart to forgive Jack, then I should be able to extend the same forgiveness to Samantha. I responded candidly, telling Laura that I wasn't sure if I could bring myself to forgive Samantha. I pointed out that, unlike Laura's situation where she was informed about the affair, Samantha had kept her betrayal hidden from me. I argued that Samantha was fully aware of the wrongness of her actions, and I wouldn't have forgiven her at the time, so why should I forgive her now? I emphasized that her betrayal wasn't a mere mistake. It was a calculated deceit that spanned several years and persisted for 2 decades. I wrestled with the notion of forgiveness and questioned how I could ever rebuild trust after such a profound breach. Shaking my head in frustration, I stood up and left the room, deliberately passing Samantha in the hallway. My expression made it clear that I wasn't swayed. Dinner that Saturday night was heavy with unspoken tension. The women attempted to make small talk, but I was distant, barely responding. My silence spoke volumes, and it was clear I was not interested in engaging. After a brief thank you, I grabbed my jacket and told them I'd be heading to Malone's, my favorite place for a quiet drink. At Malone's, feeling low, I chose a table instead of my usual spot at the bar. The bar owner, who felt like a sister to me, noticed my mood and urged me to talk. I poured out the details about Samantha's betrayal and the possibility that our youngest child might not be mine. She was outraged and offered me her straightforward perspective. I appreciated her candor, especially when she questioned if Samantha had apologized for the affair or merely for getting caught. It struck me that Samantha had never truly apologized. The bar owner, sympathetic to my plight, offered me free drinks and called a cab, taking my keys to ensure my safety. The cab dropped me off at home around 2 in the morning. Samantha was waiting at the door and helped me up to our bedroom. I collapsed into bed fully clothed, and she took off my shoes and socks before I drifted off. Later, on Wednesday night, my son called me at the office. He wanted to discuss Samantha's situation, and though he didn't say it outright, it was clear that Samantha had involved the kids in an attempt to influence me away from divorce. Normally, my son and I were on the same page, but it became evident from our conversation that Samantha's efforts had resonated with him, as he clearly sympathized with her side of the argument. I had to be firm. I told him that while Samantha's initial actions might have been a mistake, her continued deceit over months made it a deliberate choice. I asked him how he would feel if he discovered that his wife, Linda, had been unfaithful, even if the affair had ended years ago. I explained that the deceit and disrespect were what mattered. I felt that Lucas was getting too involved in our issues, taking sides in a situation that was none of his business. My frustration was mounting as I realized that my wife had kept this secret from me, using me as a fallback plan. If it hadn't been for the DNA test, I'd still be unaware of the truth. As Lucas argued that I was overreacting, I decided to end the call, feeling that the conversation was going in circles and was getting nowhere. When I got home around 6 o'clock in the evening, Samantha was busy preparing a meal that looked delicious, but my appetite had vanished. I grabbed a glass of Jack Daniels, turned on the TV, and settled into my favorite chair. Samantha came in, her expression tight, and asked what was wrong. I retorted, "Same old story. My wife cheats on me for 4 years, has a child with someone else, and now my kids are making me out to be the villain. Call Amy tonight and tell her not to bother me tomorrow unless she wants to be hung up on like Lucas." Samantha lowered her gaze, clearly upset by my response. You'd think after 31 years, she'd know better than to push me when I'm on edge. I snapped, "Why do you think the divorce isn't going to happen? You didn't just cheat on me for 4 years and have a child with another man. You also replaced me in your heart with him. You can sit here and say you weren't in love with him, and that if he'd asked you to leave me for him, you wouldn't have done it. But the truth is, you may have loved me, but you're not in love with me. You're in love with him. I'm just a reliable fallback because you know I'd do anything to keep you. You've lied, disrespected me, and now you're trying to turn our children against me. That's the last straw." I added, "But I'm not going to exact revenge on you, Laura, or Jack. I won't sabotage Jack's career as a judge. Instead, I'll file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. We'll keep our retirement accounts and divide everything else, including the house, down the middle." Seeing the tears streaming down Samantha's face as she stood up from her chair, I couldn't resist one last comment. "You've never expressed regret for your affair, probably because you don't regret it. The only thing you regret is that I found out, isn't it?" That night, I found solace in a bottle of Jack Daniels. The next day, I contacted my attorney and told her to expedite the divorce papers. She told me that I could review the divorce papers the following Tuesday, with them being finalized by Wednesday. Samantha could be served on Thursday, but I insisted that her process server come to my house on Friday night. I wanted to be there when she received the papers. Next, I called Judge Jack Thompson's office and left a message for him to return my call regarding an important matter. I knew he would get back to me quickly. When Jack did call a few hours later, he sounded a bit uneasy. He knew exactly what I was referring to, but preferred not to discuss it at his office. I agreed and told him I'd visit his house the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He wasn't aware yet that Samantha would be served the night before, but I was sure he'd find out before my 2-hour drive to his upscale residence. That Saturday night at Malone's, Samantha mentioned that Laura had called her to inform her about my upcoming meeting with Jack. Samantha wanted to know if I wanted her to come with me. I explained that this wasn't a casual chat. Jack and I had serious matters to discuss, and her presence wasn't needed. I reminded her that Jack was a distinguished appellate court judge, possibly in line for a Supreme Court position, and any confrontational behavior could have legal repercussions. Besides, she had promised not to interfere with his career. Samantha responded with a hint of jealousy, but I assured her that I intended to keep my promise and wouldn't jeopardize Jack's career prospects. After confiding in a senior colleague at the office about my situation, I took a few personal hours to meet with my attorney and review the divorce papers. I gave her the go-ahead, and as I was about to leave, she asked if I had any plans regarding Judge Jack. Puzzled, I asked why she was concerned. She replied that since I still handled some criminal cases, I might need a good lawyer. She said that while engineers might not be overly emotional, our methodical approach could be quite intimidating. She handed me her business card, and I left her office. The next 3 days flew by in a blur. We were deep into a major project at the office, which provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Even the old man at the office noticed my remarkable focus despite the chaos in my life. I told him that at least one thing was going right. On Friday evening, before leaving, I confided in him about the lawsuit being served to Samantha and my upcoming meeting with Jack. I warned him that if things went badly, I might end up in jail by Monday. He reassured me of his support and promised to cover bail if necessary. We shook hands firmly as we parted ways. Returning home, I was greeted by the inviting aroma of another elaborate meal Samantha was preparing. Lately, she had been putting extra effort into her cooking, and I had to admit she was a fantastic chef. Despite the tense atmosphere that had marked our recent meals, I made sure to thank her for the excellent dinner. I wasn't about to be ungrateful. After dinner, as we were about to settle into the family room for some television, the doorbell rang. It was close to 7 o'clock, and I had a feeling the visitor wasn't there for me, so I stayed where I was. Samantha gave me a fleeting glance before heading to answer the door. She opened it to find a well-dressed young man who asked if she was Samantha Reed, confirming her identity. He handed her a manila envelope, and with a brief, "You have been served," turned and walked away. Samantha stood frozen in her spot, her shoulders slumped and tears beginning to form in her eyes. I walked past her, closed the door, and gently led her to the kitchen table. She looked completely overwhelmed, just as I had anticipated. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, though it was only 5 minutes. Eventually, Samantha muttered, "You a hole," and rushed upstairs to our bedroom. I decided not to follow her. The hardest part was behind me now. For the first time since our marriage, I didn't share the bed with Samantha that night. Instead, I retired to the guest bedroom. Though calling it sleep might be a stretch, it was a small step toward separating from the woman I once thought was my soulmate. Despite everything that had happened, neither of us seemed ready to be the first to make a move. But in my mind, it was all over. The next morning I got up, took a shower, and dressed quietly, careful not to wake Samantha or provoke any further confrontation. I didn't check if she was asleep. I just gathered my things and left. My outfit was my usual: a collared shirt, a decent pair of Levi's jeans, and the custom-made cowboy boots with metal tips that I had bought during a visit to our son in Dallas. I left earlier than necessary to ensure I wasn't late for the meeting. Arriving ahead of time, I decided to kill some time at a cafe, which is exactly what I did. I arrived at Jack and Laura's house right at 10 o'clock and rang the doorbell. Laura, who always looked lovely but was clearly anxious, answered the door. All I could manage to say was, "I'm sorry it had to end like this," as she leaned in for a hug. She didn't respond verbally, but took my hand and led me into the room filled with Jack's memorabilia and pictures. Jack was seated in his favorite chair, but as we entered, he stood up and faced me. "Hey, Robert," he said, and I responded with a nod. Laura, looking increasingly uneasy, excused herself and left the room. Jack and I stood about 6 feet apart, sizing each other up. There was a time when I considered Jack almost like an older brother. We were that close. Although Jack was only 2 years my senior and of similar height, the comforts of the past 2 decades had added about 30 pounds to his frame, most of which had settled into a round belly. We had shared countless dreams, adventures, and experiences, fishing and hunting together, building a friendship that once made me proud. I admired how far Jack had come in his career as a judge, but now, standing before me, he was no longer a friend, but an adversary. A surge of anger overcame me. "You've stolen my wife's heart, you bastard," I shouted. "And you get to keep your pristine reputation because I promised Samantha I wouldn't spill the beans. I don't break promises to her, but you won't keep your manhood intact." With that, I took a decisive step forward. My left foot anchored, I swung my right leg upward with force, aiming directly at his groin. Jack's reaction was slower than I'd anticipated. My metal-tipped boot found its mark with unerring accuracy. I could feel his pain as I kicked him, and then I heard his howl of agony as he collapsed to the floor, clutching his injury and crying out like a wounded animal. In that moment, all my pent-up rage and frustration erupted. Laura rushed into the room, her eyes wide with shock as she saw her husband writhing in pain. She tried to comfort him, but his screams only grew louder. Fear flashed in her eyes as she glanced at me. I took out my cell phone, dialed 911, and said calmly, "There's been an accident at Judge Jack Thompson's house. We need an ambulance." As I turned to leave, Laura unexpectedly grabbed my arm. I braced for a confrontation, but instead of panic or anger, she wore a strangely calm expression. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We're clear on what needs to be done." I hugged her back, left the house, and drove home, confident that the police wouldn't come after me. Laura understood the situation and would explain it to Jack when he was able to think clearly. The drive home was a peculiar mix of relief and discomfort, almost like a gut punch. After months of daily heartbreak, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It's odd how uncovering Samantha's betrayal had actually freed me, letting me see things more clearly and focus on what was best for myself. It might not be the right choice for everyone, but sometimes you have to prioritize your own well-being. If everyone else had done it for the past 2 decades, why shouldn't I? Sure, a part of me would always care about Samantha, but I wasn't going to let this chapter linger any longer. It wasn't my fault or my choice. It was time to move on. When I got home, I went straight to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and headed to our bedroom. Samantha followed from the family room, her voice trembling as she asked, "So is this really it?" 31 years, and now I'm walking out the door, Samantha, I said, my voice cold. It's unfortunate that you're so caught up in yourself, that you can't see how deeply you've hurt me. You stole 2 decades of my life with your lies, but I'm moving on. I don't hate you, and I don't even hate Jack, though he might think otherwise now. I'll handle things with Lucas and Rachel later. You should fix things with Emily soon. Those girls are missing out. I continued, "Sign the divorce papers, Samantha, and let's end this. I'll get the rest of my things in the next few days. We don't need to talk anymore. If you have anything else to say, I left my lawyer's contact details on the kitchen table." She stood there stunned, tears welling up in her eyes, but no words coming out. I grabbed my suitcases, headed downstairs, and put them in the trunk of my car. After packing up the rest of my belongings, I left. Just like that, 31 years came to an end. I had to admit, I stretched the truth a bit. It turns out Jack did manage to keep one of his testicles after all. It took extensive surgery and months of pain, but they succeeded. I found out from Emily, who had been contacted by Laura, trying to get in touch. Laura didn't have my phone number, and the rest of the family has shown no interest in keeping me informed. In fact, they haven't spoken to me for the past 8 months, but I've come to accept it. The official story about Judge Jack's accident was that he had a mishap in his office, falling onto the corner of his posh desk and hitting the floor twice. The media downplayed the details of his injury, referring to it as a domestic accident. To my surprise, Jack received a lot of sympathetic coverage. I guess even this won't dent his chances of making it onto the Supreme Court shortlist. Samantha signed the divorce papers within a week, and last week the divorce was officially finalized. The house will be auctioned off. Samantha hasn't tried to reach out since I left, and neither have Lucas or Amy. It looks like I won't be joining the family for Christmas dinner, wherever they choose to have it. The old man is passing the company reins to me come the new year as he heads into retirement. According to our agreement, I'll run the company for 7 years before I can retire comfortably with a hefty golden parachute. He plans to find a buyer for the company, and I'll get a 10% cut of that deal as well. I've started dating again after what feels like an eternity of marriage. It's taking some time to remember how it all works. Interestingly, news of my divorce spread quickly, and several divorced friends reached out, expressing interest. Even a few of Samantha's divorced friends were surprised she let me go at all. I have to admit, it's been a nice boost to my ego. I see a promising future ahead, filled with both professional and personal challenges. In my free time away from work, I'm exploring new hobbies. One thing I've given up on is genealogy. I used to be into it, but it no longer holds my interest.